Welcome to the Muñiz Legal Podcast, From Injury to Inheritance.
Welcome to the Muñiz Legal Podcast, From Injury to Inheritance with Lizzette Muñiz, founder of Muñiz Legal, the show dedicated to guiding you from life's toughest moments to lasting peace of mind. Born in Manhattan, raised in the Bronx, a Brooklyn resident for over 2 decades, and now a proud resident of the Hudson Valley, Lizzette serves clients across New York City and the Hudson Valley. Lizzette is a bilingual Spanish-speaking attorney who helps families obtain compensation after accidents and protect what they've worked hard to achieve through thoughtful estate planning. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're talking about how to choose the right people to carry out your wishes. Good morning, Lizzette.
Good morning, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. It seems like I just saw you, and we have another fascinating topic. So let's jump in. In this episode, we're talking about how to choose guardians, trustees, beneficiaries, and executors, building a plan that protects everyone you love. Lizzette, this is one of the first decisions families face when they start planning. What makes choosing the right people so emotional and so important?
Yeah, well, particularly when it comes to choosing guardians for minor children, I find that people find that to be a very emotional decision. They care very much about the parenting of their child, who will take over, who will step into their shoes in the event that they're no longer able to parent their child. So they have the emotional part, but then they also have the practical part because they want to make sure that they choose the right people to make it possible for there to be resources that are available to properly parent the child. So there's a practical consideration and there's an emotional consideration.
So let's start with guardians specifically. When parents of young children come to you, what factors do you encourage them to think through before they name a guardian?
Yeah, for sure. I encourage them to think about who is in line with their values and what they hope to impart into their children. So, if you have friends or family members who share the same values and the same concerns, or could be religion for some families, to consider those things. Then, a practical consideration is geography, right? So, depending on the age of your child, geography might not matter very much. If your child is very young, moving from one state to another might not make such a big difference. But if your child is older, maybe middle school age or high school age, moving your child from their environment could be very traumatic for them. So you want to think about geography. And then when it comes to choosing fiduciaries, you want to think about people who can be responsible with money in a way that you see fit. You know, some people are less risk averse. They may have an entrepreneurial spirit and they want their kid to be able to, take a big chunk of money and invest it in starting a business. Whereas some people might be more conservative. And so you might want to choose a fiduciary who's more conservative with their money.
So I know some people think, well, I'm going to pick a guardian and they're going to do everything. But sometimes the person who loves your kids the most isn't the best person to handle the money. So, how do you help parents separate those emotional decisions from the practical ones?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point, and I do bring that up during our family wealth planning sessions all the time, that you don't have to choose one person to do all of the things. Maybe somebody would make a really great parent and love your child and teach them the way you would, but maybe they're not so good with money. But maybe you have another friend or family member who's really good with money, and you can create a team, for your child. You can have somebody who's going to nurture them and then somebody who's in charge of the finances. Those can be two separate people.
So when families, maybe don't have close relatives nearby, and especially when we're talking about an older child, what options do they have for choosing a guardian or a backup plan?
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be a family member or a close friend. If you belong to any organizations where you have people that you trust and rely on, maybe for me, it would be like my Rotary Club, right? There are people that I trust and rely on. It could be your church. It could also be an attorney. So if you have a trusted attorney or professional in your life, you could ask them to serve as a fiduciary.
Let's talk about trustees, on the other hand. What qualities make somebody a great trustee, and how is that role different from a guardian?
Well, for a trustee, that's more of a fiduciary financial role, right? So they're the ones who are going to make sure that financial decisions are executed the way you intended them to occur. So it's less of an emotional decision and more of a practical decision when you're choosing a trustee. You want to think about somebody who is responsible, who's detail oriented, who has some financial knowledge, but they don't have to be experts. They just need to know when to ask for help.
Now, another part of estate planning is not just in the case of somebody passing, but also if something else happens and they themselves need to be cared for. Oftentimes, I know people turn this on to their adult children, but for somebody that doesn't have children, how do you recommend that they choose beneficiaries or somebody to look after them if something happens?
Yes, actually, I've done a lot of those recently with people
Mm.
who are formulating their estate plans, and people who don't have children actually find it very difficult to form their estate plans because they say, if I had kids, this would be an easier decision. I would just, make them the beneficiary, make them my healthcare proxy, make them my POA. And so they have to kind of think outside the box to who are the trusted individuals in their lives who would make the decisions and would honor their decisions. I have one good friend who's doing her estate plan right now, and she's actually utilizing the holiday season when she's going to see all her family members to discuss this with them and ask them, would you be willing to serve in this role for me? Do you know what my desires and what my wants are when it comes to healthcare? And she's going to take the opportunity to discuss that with them so everybody's aware and so that she can get their consent to list them as fiduciaries trustees in her estate plan.
Wow, that's wise and brave
Mhm.
for her. Good for her. And that's a great example of what needs to happen in some of those cases. It's great that she had you to encourage her with that.
Mhm.
Now let's turn to the executor. The executor, of course, has to carry out the will and handle the estate. So what should people know about the amount of responsibility that is really involved with being an executor?
Yeah, well, the executor is a big responsibility. And this lends itself to the last question that I answered about making sure that the person who you choose to be your executor is willing and up to the task. And that could change. Somebody who is able to serve as your executor now may not be able to serve as your executor 3 years from now. So that's why it's important to review your estate plan. Um, Let people know what to expect, and then adjust it periodically based on circumstances that change.
Does that factor in as well when you're looking I mean, do you have a recommendation? If somebody is, say, a little bit older, do you recommend that they seek somebody just as wise as they are or look to the younger generation?
That's a really great question. And I have somebody who is asked me that question just recently. And what she's done is she's listed kind of a combination of options. She has a relative who is an attorney, very responsible, detail oriented, but older than she is.
Mhm.
And then that person has a child who is also very responsible, but younger than she is. And so she's chosen to list her cousin, who's older than she is but very responsible, as the executor, but then she's listed his son as the successor. And so in the case he can't serve, then his son would serve. So you can take a combination of approaches.
Wonderful. Well, the fact is many people avoid these decisions because they're afraid of choosing wrong. What would you say to somebody who feels stuck on that?
Yeah. So it's funny because we just had a brief chat, you and I, about how perfection is the enemy of good, right?
Yes.
And that's been my philosophy for a while now. And so what I tell people is don't overthink it. Do something. Some plan is better than no plan. So just put together a plan. Make sure that you get your key documents in place, a healthcare proxy, a power of attorney, a will, and if necessary, a trust, and review it periodically and update it and make changes to it. Because, like I said, circumstances change anyway. This is not a set it and forget it process. You don't do your estate plan once and put it in a drawer and forget about it. People die, people's circumstances change. Who you would want to raise your child today may not be who you would want to raise your child 5 or 10 years from now. So you need to start with something and then let it evolve.
Can you share any stories from people who have delayed this decision, put it off, and then suffered the consequences?
What I'm seeing a lot of now are the children of people who put it off, and they're the ones suffering the consequences, because I get calls all the time from people saying my parent passed away, and I now the will is in probate, and it's been in probate for 2 or 3 years, and the court wants this one document, and I just feel like they're constantly asking for something, and I can't get this estate closed, and can you help me? So that's one example, people having to deal with the probate. And then the other example is when children call me and they say, my mom can't take care of herself anymore. She can't pay her bills. She's forgetting things. She needs an estate plan. And I have to say to them, unfortunately, if she's been diagnosed with some sort of mental incapacity, then she's not going to be able to create an estate plan now. And in some cases, I even have to refer them to an attorney for a guardianship proceeding, which is a legal proceeding. And it's expensive and it's challenging. And you have to get doctors to basically declare that your parent is incapacitated. And, so what I like to tell my estate planning clients is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the sooner the better.
That just sounds heart-wrenching. But let's end on a happier note. Can you share some stories of people who did the planning and when they passed, things just went along beautifully?
Yeah, I definitely have clients who have done the planning, everything went beautifully, and then their children, in the process of creating their own plan, they involved their children. And then their children at that time said, they're adult children. This happens with adult children. They'll say, you know what? I think I need an estate plan too. So then what they're doing is they're also modeling the behavior for their children to leave everything in place. And one of the beautiful things about planning is that when you are no longer there for your loved ones and they're grieving your loss, you have lifted a huge weight off of them. They don't have to deal with that. They can do, a celebration of life without having to deal with the nuances of court proceedings and financial constraints, or trying to figure out what your desires were for funeral, burial, all of those things. You lift that off of your loved ones, and it's the best gift you can give your child.
And creates a lasting legacy.
Yes, creates a lasting legacy.
Well, thank you for this great information. Appreciate you. And that's it for today's episode of the Muñiz Legal Podcast, From Injury to Inheritance. If you'd like to learn more about attorney Lizzette Muñiz and her work at the Muñiz Legal, visit muñizlegal.com. You'll find resources in English and Spanish to help you recover after an accident and, in this case, protect your future through proper planning, creating a legacy. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review if you found today's episode helpful.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.